Welcome back to our Apes Flipped Classroom. And today we're continuing our discussion of pest management or pest control. And today, instead of just talking about pesticides, we're talking about this concept called integrated pest management. So let's just jump right in and talk a little bit about what integrated pest management is. So integrated pest management, or IPM, uses a combination of pest control methods, and those are designed to minimize the environmental disruption and to minimize pesticide use. So IPM requires researching and monitoring the pests and targeting methods that are specific to those pests and their particular life cycles. So integrated pest management really is an integrated system. It requires record keeping from year to year and an evaluation of the effectiveness. It requires constant monitoring and inspection, identifying what pests are there, looking at what the weather is going to do so that we choose the most effective methods, plan according to what we consider a threshold. So the goal of integrated pest management is not to completely eliminate pests, but to bring them down to a manageable level. And then having done all of that, the farmer is then going to implement those integrated pest management tactics. And those tactics include really 4 or 5 different pieces. The one that we talk about the most probably is what's called biological control. And biological control means bringing in a natural predator or a natural parasite that helps to control the pest. Chemical control is also part of integrated pest management. It should be the smallest part. Cultural control means minimizing the conditions that are ideal for the pests, so minimizing those conditions that the pests need to live. And then physical control means controlling pests with physical methods. So let's jump in and talk a little bit about each of those aspects. So we've already talked about chemical control and pesticides, so we're going to talk about biocontrol or biological controls. So this means introducing a natural predator or a natural parasite or a natural competitor to control the population. So this can take 2 forms. You can either purchase and actually spread the control organisms in fields, or you can create habitat that is appealing to those predators and attract them naturally. So a great example of purchasing and spreading control organisms is ladybugs. These are commercially available. They are fantastic control for aphids, which are a sap-sucking organism that can cause huge amounts of crop damage. Spiders, of course, for lots of pest insects. Those are ones that we are more likely to create a habitat that is appealing for them. This is not something that we can commercially go out and buy spiders. And again, something that we want to create a habitat for would be parasitic wasps for caterpillars. So these are very commonly seen in our gardens, but we want to create an environment that's hospitable for them. So you can actually build homes for wasps that will encourage them to come. Okay, so that's biological control. Let's talk about a couple of cultural controls. So one cultural control is crop rotation. So a lot of pests prefer one specific crop or a specific crop family. They tend to lay their eggs in the soil so that when their larvae hatch, they're near that preferred food source. So by rotating crops, by planting a different crop every season, you can prevent the pests from becoming established, because when those larvae hatch, they're not near their preferred food source. And so they're likely to die off before they can survive and reproduce. Other benefits of crop rotation: it disrupts weed growth because different crops are planted at different times, which means that we don't have bare soil that can be taken over by weeds. Crop rotation also helps to minimize soil erosion because you don't have bare soil. Another cultural process is what we call intercropping. There's a lot of different ways that intercropping can help with pest control. One of them is called the push-pull system. And so when we talk about the push-pull system, we're talking about planting organisms, planting plants that emit volatile chemicals that repel pests away from crops. Those are considered push plants. And then the other side, the pull side, is planting other plants that attract the insects away from the crops. So a lot of farmers and a lot of gardeners plant marigolds around their plants because a lot of insects are repelled by the smell of marigolds. So that would be an example of a push plant. Here in our image, we have an push-pull system. So we plant desmodium in between the rows of our crops. Those emit a chemical that moths don't like, and it repels them away. At the same time, they're planting napier grass around the crop, and that pulls the moths towards it so that it lays the eggs and therefore the caterpillars in the napier grass instead of in the corn. You can also create a habitat with pull plants that attracts those natural predators. So we can have a push-pull for the pest itself, or we can plant plants that pull in predators. So that kind of comes back to our biological control. So these very often work together. A third aspect is what we call mechanical control. So mechanical control is having traps or some sort of physical barrier. So if we're talking about a pest of weeds, then a physical barrier might be weed or ground fabric that prevents the weeds from growing. If we're thinking of rodents as pests, then traps are very commonly used as a physical form or mechanical. And then the third piece, which we've already talked about, is genetic modification. So this might be planting typical hybridized plants that are more resistant to pests, or it might be planting genetically modified organisms that are more resistant to pests. So let's talk quickly about the benefits and the drawbacks of integrated pest management. So benefits, one huge benefit is that by reducing the amount of pesticides used, it's going to reduce the death and mutation of non-target species. So by not using atrazine, we're preventing that intersex issue in amphibians, eagle death from DDT, the bee die-offs that are caused by Roundup. So by minimizing pesticide use, you're minimizing all of those negative consequences. It also reduces the effects on human consumers of produce because a lot of pesticides are known carcinogens. And so by using fewer of them on our crops, we're likely to have less contamination of our food. And of course, it reduces the contamination of surface and groundwater by agricultural runoff. So why doesn't everybody use it? So it's more time consuming. It does require that monitoring, paying attention, maybe changing things. It can be more costly than just crop dusting with pesticides. You have to research your specific pests. You may be planting different species of crops. And so it's just a little bit more expensive and more time consuming. It can actually increase yield. So there are definitely major benefits as well. So quick summary, remember that when we talk about integrated pest management, it's really important to talk about it as an integrated program. It is not just one aspect. So when you talk about integrated pest management, you can't just talk about biological control. You have to talk about the system. Biological control, physical control, cultural control, chemical control, and genetic methods. The 5 put together give you that integrated pest management. Okay, and your FRQ prompt for today is to justify whether or not these data in this graphic support the use of a biocontrol method for limiting pest damage. So we can see our non-treated control, our four different biological controls, and then a chemical control. All right, as always, I look forward to hearing your questions and to delving into this more deeply in class.